The day my son called me an embarrassment was the same day I decided to stop explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 58 years old. For 32 years, I worked as an engineer at a manufacturing company in Ohio called Harrison Industrial Systems. It wasn't glamorous work. We built heavy equipment parts for construction companies. Steel components, hydraulic systems, things most people never notice but that keep entire job sites running. The kind of work that leaves grease under your nails and a permanent ache in your shoulders. But I was proud of it. I started there when I was 26. Back then, the factory floor was loud, chaotic, and full of men who believed loyalty meant something. And I gave that place everything. Missed birthdays. Missed holidays. Worked weekends when deadlines were tight. I helped design 3 of the company's most profitable product lines. But loyalty is a strange thing in business. Because the moment profits start dropping, loyalty suddenly becomes an unnecessary expense. I learned that the hard way. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Human Resources asked me to come upstairs. Whenever HR says that, you already know something's wrong. But I still wasn't prepared for what I heard. A young executive I'd never met before sat behind the desk. He couldn't have been older than 35. Perfect suit. Perfect smile. The kind of smile that looks polite but doesn't reach the eyes. He cleared his throat and said the words that erased 3 decades of my life in about 12 seconds. Daniel, the company is moving in a different direction. Different direction. I'd heard that phrase before. It usually means someone older is being replaced by someone cheaper. They said my position was being restructured. They thanked me for my many years of service. Then they handed me a folder. Severance paperwork. A security escort walked me out of the building I had helped build. Just like that. 32 years. Gone. What hurt the most wasn't losing the job. It was realizing how quickly people forget who helped them succeed. I drove home in silence that afternoon. My wife, Linda, met me at the door. She didn't say much. Just hugged me. That hug meant more than anything HR had said. But the hardest part came later that night. At dinner. My son Ethan was there. 28 years old. Smart kid. Business degree. Ambitious. He had started working at Harrison Industrial a year earlier, not on the factory floor like I did. No. He worked upstairs. Management training program. The kind of program designed for future executives. I had actually been proud of that. Thought maybe he'd do things differently. Maybe he'd remember where he came from. At dinner, I finally told him. I lost the job today. He looked surprised. But not the way I expected. Not shocked. More uncomfortable. Like someone hearing inconvenient news. He put down his fork and said quietly, "Yeah, I heard about that." I blinked. "You heard?" He nodded. They talked about it in the office. The room went silent for a moment. Then he sighed and said the sentence that stuck with me for the next year of my life. "Dad, maybe it was time." I felt something tighten in my chest. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. "You've been there forever. The company's trying to modernize. New systems, automation, data-driven production." Then he shrugged. "I mean, some of the guys upstairs think the old engineers were kind of holding things back." Holding things back. I stared at my own son. The same kid I used to take fishing on weekends. The same boy whose science projects I helped build. "Are you saying I was holding the company back?" He hesitated, then said it. Not loudly, not angrily, but calmly, like he truly believed it. "Well, yeah." My wife looked at him sharply, but he kept going. "Dad, look, I'm not trying to be rude, but the truth is, times change. Companies evolve." He shrugged again. "You can't expect things to stay the same forever." I didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said the words that cut deeper than losing the job ever did. "You just have to accept that the world moved on." Moved on. At that moment, something inside me went very quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just quiet. Because I realized something. My son didn't see me as the man who built a career from nothing. To him, I was just an outdated worker the company had replaced. I stood up from the table. "I'm going for a drive." Linda asked where I was going. But I didn't know. I just needed air. I drove for almost 2 hours that night, thinking about everything. About the factory. About the people I trained. About the machines I designed. About the company that decided I was no longer useful. But mostly, I thought about my son. And the way he said it, like my entire life had been irrelevant. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot near the old industrial district. There was a diner there I used to visit years ago after late shifts. Still open. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and stared at the dark street. After a while, an old memory came back to me. Something my first mentor at Harrison had told me 30 years earlier. He said, "Companies don't fail because of machines. They fail because the people making decisions forget how the machines actually work." Back then, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But sitting in that diner, something clicked. Because I knew Harrison Industrial better than anyone in that company. I knew their production lines, their supplier contracts, their hidden problems, the weaknesses management didn't even realize existed. And suddenly, I wondered something. If the company was moving in a different direction, where exactly were they going? Because from what I'd seen the last few years, they weren't moving forward. They were making mistakes, expensive ones. And if those mistakes continued, there was only one direction Harrison Industrial was heading: down. I finished my coffee, walked back to my truck, and for the first time since being fired, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I realized something important. The company thought they had removed a problem. What they had actually done was remove the only person still paying attention. And sometimes, that's the moment when the betrayal story begins. But I had no idea yet just how far that story was going to go. Or that 1 year later, the same company that fired me would be sitting across a table from me, asking if I wanted to buy it. And the most interesting part, my son still worked there, and he had no idea what was coming. For the first few weeks after I lost the job, life slowed down in a strange way. When you spend 32 years waking up at 5:30 in the morning, putting on work boots, and heading to the same factory, your body doesn't immediately understand when that routine disappears. Every morning I still woke up early, still poured coffee, still looked out the kitchen window at the driveway where my truck used to warm up before work. Except now, there was nowhere to go. Linda tried to keep my spirits up. She suggested I take a break. "Maybe this is a good thing," she said one morning. "You've worked your whole life. Maybe it's time to rest." But rest wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the way everything ended. The silence. The way people I'd known for decades suddenly stopped calling. Except for one person. 3 weeks after I lost the job, my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. Frank Morales. Frank had worked at Harrison for almost as long as I had. Head of supply chain. Smart guy. One of the few people upstairs who actually understood how the factory worked. I answered. "Frank." He chuckled softly. "Danny. Thought you might still pick up." "Of course." There was a short pause. Then he said something interesting. "Listen. I probably shouldn't be calling you." That immediately got my attention. "What's going on?" He lowered his voice. "You remember those automation systems management installed last year?" I laughed quietly. "Hard to forget. I warned them those systems weren't compatible with the hydraulic line." "Yeah," Frank said. "About that." Another pause. Then he said the words that confirmed what I had suspected. "The production line is a mess." I leaned back in my chair. "How bad?" Bad enough that we're missing delivery deadlines. I wasn't surprised. The automation system they installed had been designed for a different manufacturing setup. I had explained that during the planning meetings. Management ignored it, because the consulting firm told them automation would increase efficiency by 40%. Consultants love big numbers. Reality usually has other ideas. Frank kept talking. Half the floor supervisors are confused. The new software doesn't match the machine timing. Parts keep jamming on the assembly line. I rubbed my chin. That's exactly what I warned them about. Yeah. Then he said something else. And that's not even the biggest problem. Now I was curious. What's bigger than production delays? Frank sighed. They signed 2 massive supply contracts based on the new production projections. I sat up. How massive? Hundreds of millions over 5 years. Now that was serious. If production drops, I said slowly, they can't meet those contracts. Exactly. And if they miss the contracts? Frank finished the sentence. Penalties. Huge ones. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. You want to hear the craziest part? Sure. The executive team still thinks everything is fine. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Management offices are far away from factory floors. Problems often take months to reach the people in charge. Frank lowered his voice again. Danny, between you and me, if this keeps going for another year. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew exactly what he meant. The company could collapse. We talked for another 15 minutes. Mostly technical stuff. Production numbers. Supplier issues. Shipping delays. By the time the call ended, I understood something very clearly. Harrison Industrial was standing on a very fragile foundation, and the people running it had no idea. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, thinking. Not about revenge. Not about my son. Just about business. Because when a company starts making bad decisions at the top, those decisions eventually show up in the numbers. 3 months later, those numbers became public. The first sign appeared in the financial news. Harrison Industrial misses quarterly earnings. Then came the second quarter. Production delays impact Harrison contracts. And by the third quarter, the headline got worse. Harrison Industrial shares dropped 38% amid operational problems. One evening I was sitting in the living room watching the news when Linda walked in. They're talking about your old company again. I looked up at the screen. A financial analyst was speaking. Harrison Industrial expanded too aggressively with new automation systems. Now they're struggling to meet production targets. I muted the television. Linda looked at me carefully. You knew this would happen. I nodded slowly. I warned them. She sat beside me. What are you thinking? I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I had started thinking about something dangerous. Opportunity. Businesses fail every day. But sometimes, the reason they fail isn't because the company is worthless. It's because the people running it don't understand it. And Harrison Industrial still had something extremely valuable. Factories. Equipment. Contracts. Clients. The foundation of a strong company was still there. It was just being mismanaged. Which meant, if someone bought the company at the right moment, they could rebuild it. And that thought kept returning to my mind, over and over, until one night Linda finally asked the question directly. Daniel. I looked at her. You're thinking about buying that company, aren't you? I smiled slightly. Not yet. She crossed her arms. But you're thinking about it. Yes. She studied my face. That would take a lot of money. I know. You'd be risking everything. I know. And your son still works there. That part made me pause. Because she was right. Ethan was part of that company now. part of the management team that believed the old engineers were holding things back. But something inside me had already made the decision. Not emotionally, logically. If the company kept falling, eventually investors would step in. And when that moment came, someone would have the chance to buy it. The only question was, who? And 1 year later, that exact moment finally arrived. Harrison Industrial officially announced something no one in town expected. The company was for sale. And when I read that headline, I quietly picked up the phone and called an old friend who worked in private investment. Because sometimes, the biggest opportunity in your life comes from the moment someone else decides you're no longer useful. And I was about to prove something. Not to the company, not to the investors, but to the one person who thought the world had moved on without me. My son. When Harrison Industrial officially announced it was looking for buyers, most people in town reacted with shock. I didn't. I had been watching the numbers for almost a year. Production delays, contract penalties, falling stock prices. To anyone who understood manufacturing, the outcome had been obvious months earlier. But what interested me wasn't the fall of the company. It was what always comes after a fall. Opportunity. The day the news broke, I made a phone call to a man named Robert Klein. Robert and I had known each other for almost 20 years. He used to work as a financial advisor for several manufacturing firms in the Midwest. These days he worked with private investment groups that specialized in buying struggling companies. Turnaround specialists. The kind of investors who look for broken businesses they can rebuild. When he answered the phone, he sounded surprised. Danny Carter. I haven't heard that name in a while. Still alive, I said. He laughed. I heard about Harrison letting you go. Their loss. I might have a question for you. Go ahead. I didn't waste time. You heard Harrison Industrial is looking for buyers? Oh, we heard, he said immediately. Your firm interested? There was a pause. Then he said something interesting. Some of our partners are looking at it. My heart rate slowed just a little. That was exactly what I hoped to hear. Before they decide, I said, they might want to understand what's actually wrong with the company. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Robert asked the question. You offering insight? Yes. And why would you do that? I smiled slightly. Because I know that company better than anyone they're going to talk to. Silence. Then he said something carefully. If we're going to look seriously at Harrison, we'll need someone who understands the operation from the inside. That's why I called. Robert didn't answer for several seconds. Then he said, Danny, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Yes. You want in on the deal. I want to help fix the company. He chuckled softly. Those two things usually go together. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room in Chicago with 3 investors. They asked questions for almost 4 hours. About production systems. About supplier contracts. About equipment maintenance. About management mistakes. And by the end of that meeting, they understood something important. Harrison Industrial wasn't failing because the company was weak. It was failing because the leadership had stopped listening to the people who actually understood the business. One of the investors, a woman named Claire, leaned forward and asked me a simple question. If our group buys Harrison, what would you change first? I didn't hesitate. Management. She smiled. That answer alone tells me you know what you're doing. The negotiation process took months. Financial reviews. Legal paperwork. Meetings with banks. During that entire time, almost no one in town knew what was happening, especially not the people still working at Harrison, including my son. Ethan believed the company would be bought by a large corporate group, someone from outside, someone with a polished business resume. The idea that his father might be involved never crossed his mind. And I didn't tell him, not because I wanted to surprise him, but because I wanted the business deal to happen the right way. No emotions. Just decisions. Finally, nearly 11 months after the day I lost my job, the investors made their offer, and Harrison Industrial accepted. The company had a new ownership group, but the most interesting detail wasn't in the news headlines. The news said, "A group of Midwest investors has acquired Harrison Industrial Systems." What the news didn't say was that I was now a partner in that group. Not a majority owner, but a major one. More importantly, I was the one responsible for rebuilding the company. 3 weeks later, the first meeting with senior management was scheduled. Monday morning. Executive conference room. The same room where decisions had once been made about my future. Now I was walking back into that building again. For the first time in over a year. The parking lot looked exactly the same. The factory smelled exactly the same. Metal, oil, warm steel. But this time, no one escorted me to the door. Instead, the receptionist stood up nervously. "Mr. Carter, the executive team is waiting upstairs." Mr. Carter. That was new. I walked down the same hallway I used to take for 32 years. But something felt different. Not power. Not pride. Just clarity. When I entered the conference room, 6 executives were already seated at the table, including the young executive who had fired me. His expression changed immediately when he saw me. Confusion. Then disbelief. "Daniel." I nodded politely. "Good morning." One of the investors stood up. "Everyone, before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone important." He gestured toward me. "This is Daniel Carter." Silence filled the room. Then he finished the sentence. "Mr. Carter is one of the partners in the investment group that now owns Harrison Industrial." The room froze. I saw the color drain from several faces. But the reaction I noticed most was at the end of the table, where my son Ethan was sitting. His eyes locked on mine, completely stunned, because the man he believed had been holding the company back had just become one of the people running it. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, the investor continued. "Daniel will be leading operational restructuring." Which meant something very simple. I was now responsible for deciding who stayed and who didn't. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. We reviewed financial reports, production failures, contract problems. But there was one moment I will never forget. Near the end of the meeting, Ethan finally spoke. "Mr. Carter." He almost said, "Dad," but stopped himself. "Yes," I said calmly. He cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you were involved in the acquisition." I nodded. "It happened recently." He looked down at the table for a moment, then said quietly, "I guess I underestimated you." The room was silent again. I studied my son's face. He looked embarrassed, uncomfortable, maybe even ashamed. But I didn't say anything cruel, because this was never about humiliating him. It was about something else. Understanding. So I simply said, "Sometimes experience still has value." After the meeting ended, most of the executives left quickly. But Ethan stayed behind. We stood in the conference room alone. He looked at me carefully. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything?" He didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "I was wrong about you." I nodded. "I know." Another silence. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Are you going to fire me?" I leaned back against the table. For a moment, I thought about the dinner a year earlier, the words he had said, the way he believed the world had moved on without me. But revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, the real victory is proving someone wrong. So I shook my head. "No." His eyes widened slightly. "You're not." "No." Then I added something important. "But if you stay here, you're going to learn the business from the ground up." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean the factory floor." He blinked. You want me working downstairs? Yes. I looked him directly in the eyes. The same place where the old engineers were holding the company back. For the first time in his life, my son didn't have a clever response. Just silence. Then finally, a small nod. And in that moment, I realized something. The company might not have been the only thing that needed rebuilding. Families sometimes need rebuilding too. One lesson at a time. One honest moment at a time. And sometimes, the greatest revenge in life is simply becoming the man people said you never could be. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Tell me something. What would you have done in my place?